All right, so I often talk about forming positive habits. Well, sometimes what you have to do first is identify and break the bad productivity habits that you have. So I've devised a kind of checklist that pretty much successfully identifies and helps you to change those bad productivity habits that you may have fallen into so that you can be more productive and be more successful. So let's go through that list together and look it over. And I think once you hear some of the things that I'm going to talk about, they're going to resonate with you. All right, so step number one is how the heck am I going to identify the bad habits that I have? Well, first you have to understand what type of bad habit you have. Is it emotional? Is it something that you're procrastinating about? Are you rushing maybe to finish projects? Do you let distractions take away your concentration? So that's all kind of the emotional piece. Maybe it's mindset based. So, are you telling yourself you can't do it? Or are you saying you can't work any harder? Or maybe it's action based. So, an action based one, you'd ask yourself, are you doing that same routine every day? Are you taking advantage of the tools and the resources to make things easier? So those are some of the questions that you're looking at in order to identify the bad habit. The next series of questions I would ask once you kind of pinpoint emotional, mindset, or action based, are you accurately keeping track of your time and the things that you do repeatedly, over and over again? And kind of just step back from that behavior and see if you can then get a handle on what's causing that bad habit. A lot of times it's a trigger that's behind it. Once you've discovered that, um, you have to go to the root cause of what the bad habit is. So sometimes the root cause of a bad habit is going to be because you're bored, because you're stressed. It could be certain people, situations. It could be fear. There's lots of different things. So think about that and mark down what you feel is causing that at the root of what's happening. Some more of the common bad habits that we're talking about um, would be indecisiveness. You're setting deadlines for making decisions that you feel like you're forcing yourself to do. Um, Doing the easy tasks first, and then you schedule the harder tasks or the more important tasks um, for later, but then later never comes. You might have the habit of checking and responding to emails or social media frequently throughout the day. And you could be procrastinating on something like starting, like I talked about, starting or finishing particular tasks. So you kind of have to get to the reason of why you're putting it off and determine if that's the best way you're supposed to be tackling it. Um, or maybe you can break it up into smaller pieces, or maybe you can just delegate it. So once all that kind of is looked into and thought, put some thought into all of that, the way to go about fixing those types of productivity habits that you've fallen into is number one, making sure that you are only working on changing one habit at a time. Focus on changing it before moving on to the next one. You may find that you have several that need to be tackled, but make sure you're only focusing on one right now. Then start gradually cutting back on doing the bad habit instead of trying to change it. Um, so, for instance, checking your email and social media throughout the day multiple times. Don't just say, I'm not going to do it anymore. Um, Gradually cut back on it. So if you find you're going into your social media, every hour, then try cutting that back and only doing it every couple of hours to begin with. Changing that trigger that's causing the bad productivity habit is really what we're trying to get at. It's all well and fine to say, okay, I'm no longer going to check my social media every single, 30 minutes or stay in it all day and just cut it out like that. It has to be gradual. And whatever that trigger is that's causing you to be in your social media, now we're using social media for example. If you're feeling like you need to be in social media all the time because you have fear of missing out, or whatever that trigger is that you've discovered in the earlier part that I talked about, we have to work on changing that trigger before anything else. And then you're going to set a goal, a micro goal, and a plan so you can overcome the habit. Like I talked about, gradually cutting back. We're going to probably look at social media. And if you are someone who is, just leaving your tab open all day, we're going to gradually cut that back so that you are only looking at it once every hour, and then once every couple of hours, and then maybe cutting that back to morning, noon, and late afternoon, or later in the evening. And then from there, you see gradual changes, and there is a plan around it so that it's not a sudden change that's not going to be effective. It has to be done in small, manageable chunks. We're going to replace that with the good productivity habit. So, for instance, picking on social media again, the good productivity habit to get into around social media would be choosing to be in it for maybe 30 minutes every single morning, and again 30 minutes later in the afternoon, or last part of your day, so that you're still getting the pieces that you need from social media, giving yourself time to interact with other people, but not getting lost down that rabbit hole. So that's really what I mean when I'm talking about bad versus good productivity habits. The first thing you want to remember, or the first thing you really need to do, is recognize where your bad habits lie. And then you have to work on creating that goal and the plan around it. And the best way to do that is to get help through an accountability partner, through a friend, through a colleague, because it's really hard to do that on your own. I hope this has been helpful.